This is a snow globe. When I was a kid, my grandmother would leave a bunch of them out all year round. And when we go to visit her, I would sit there and every now and then, kind of go through them, shake them up. And I noticed differences in a bunch of her snow globes. Some, the snow actually, swirled around and it was glitter. And I wondered what it would be. And there's like little scenes in it. And then the other ones I could tell that she had popped the bottom out and refilled with water and they just didn't work quite right. And things like that. So I always was sort of like, had the reaction that a lot of people that have over these things. It's its own little world in there. And then a couple years later, when I was older, probably like, going into the late 80s there, from the late 70s, it just fascinating because Alan Moore had a character in Watchmen sit there and say some of the same things I and a lot of other people were saying about snow globes. And I thought that was very cool. It's its own little world. And in the world of collecting, and in the world, anything you'd really get involved in, it's kind of like, you're inside of a snow globe. You're in your own little world. And you can sit here and you can analyze it and try to figure out what does it make it work, and it's special in there. And a lot of times, the little snow globe, whatever your hobby is or whatever you're into and your interests are, is kind of to get away from the world a little bit here. It's a fast-paced world. Billions and billions of people and stuff. And you got your own little thing over here that billions of people don't know about. And it's kind of cool. It's like a little escape. We got to have our own time, our own interests, because there's enough out here in the world to deal with that you need a break. But what's been going on lately, and I was finally able to put my finger on it, was, in our world of collecting and stuff, when you're in the snow globe long enough, you kind of get your own language and your own book, and talk about the like-minded people I've talked about here, where you can meet perfect strangers, yet you can have something to talk about from reading the comics and debating things and all that little comic book trivia you get. And here lately, what I've found out, one of the reasons I haven't felt like shooting videos besides working all the time and being tired and kind of staying away from social media more and more, is everything is so political. I'm surprised somebody hasn't got one of these snow globes and talked about special little snowflakes living in them and stuff. A term that I'm getting very tired of myself. Because what has happened is what I finally could put my finger on is it seems like whenever I try to talk about comics, Marvel specifically, and do what I've always done on this channel and with other collectors over the years and stuff, and just trying to talk about why they suck, what makes them good, little gems out there that you can find something a little special on, just a comic book talk, it always shifts from the comics to politics. Identity politics, alt-right, alt-left, conservative, all sorts of things. And all of a sudden you get away from the comics and you're stuck talking politics, and it's just a freaking powder keg out there, which is just amazing. And due to politics and things like that, every now and then it seems like if you live in this little bubble, just like video games a couple years ago with Gamergate and all that stuff, and now it seems like history is repeating itself with Marvel and comics and things like that. The world kind of wants to come over here and see what's got everything shaken up, and it's coming over here. Now we have a flood of people coming in here who don't understand this little world that's in here, and they come in and they want to talk about comics, and they've seen a few movies and they think they know what's going on now, and they don't know the history of comics. They don't know that X-Men was the biggest book of diversity you could have read, and this America character, is not the first Latino superhero that they had, and definitely not the first lesbian in comic books and things like that. But they want the now, the new, what's going on now and stuff, and that's kind of another thing that makes it a powder keg. We got people trying to come into the snow globe, and they're not going to all fit in here, and they're going to poison the water. It's going to dilute. Whatever is in a snow globe is a little bit denser, and that's kind of what makes the magic work. And much like my grandmother having the one she kept for years and people playing with, and just time wearing on it and stuff and filling it with water, it's never the same. And that's a lot what's going on. Because what happened is last week, they had a retailer summit where retailers got to tell Marvel what they liked and didn't like about the books, what was working from their point of view, and things like that. And it's very important for Marvel to sell books, because they're over 50% of the market share for years that keeps these comic book shops open, despite having all these other companies. That's just how things work. Will things change? Is Marvel number one? Not anymore. They've had a big slump in sales. And now we're living in the age of spin. Because the vice president of marketing or whatever had to come in there and said he was misquoted because he was saying with a backhanded slap that what they were hearing is people didn't want females in comics, and diversity is just not wanted, it's not selling, and things like that. And then he had to retract and correct himself and say he was misquoted. It's all spin. And he was using buzzwords like fresh and new. In reality, they're throwing things against the wall hoping it'll stick. And they just can't believe that, people just love those core characters of Marvel that have always been there. And when you're in the world of comics and you got a passion for this stuff and you're in the snow globe, like that, you get caught up in not being able to be objective. And one of the things that I've been caught up in and finally put my finger on is on a Facebook thread today and a few conversations I've had, and people get really riled up, and that's where I noticed that it shifts from talking about Marvel, because Marvel is very political in identity politics and alt-left and things going on like that, and it goes straight to the politics, and you forget the original conversation you were having is, why are these books bad? Is that why they're not selling? Because I don't think it's the fact that people don't want diversity. They don't want female characters. Sorry, man. Marvel's had female characters from the beginning. They had diversity biggest with the X-Men. It's always been there. It's not that. It's the bad writing. And you cannot talk about the bad writing that they're doing and the fact that they are also insulting the artists that they have. If you were following any of the news this past week, it's April 5th. If you want to do like Google search 2017 about what's been going on with Marvel and things like that. But you can't talk about comics. People get really irate and it goes straight to politics, and that's a problem when you want to have a conversation. I come from the stance that there's a time to talk about politics, and there's a time for men to bitch about women and women to bitch about men and to talk about gender. But when that's all you have to talk about, you're a very boring person. Maybe you need to get out of the snow globe and go into the world a little bit. I'll say it, because there's more there. And as I was doing these threads on Facebook and reading how people kind of started going where they wanted with it and kind of reading what they were going with it, it dawned on me that you can't have a conversation about Marvel Comics from the last couple of years and specifically point out a few things in these comics to talk about the bad writing and the bad execution and the insulting things that they're doing for both sides, alt-right, alt-left, SJW, whatever you want, because nobody's reading the books. They are in a slump, and that's the thing that gets me. You start out talking about comics, but nobody can talk about the comics because they're not reading them. I'll read a couple online. If I make it to a comic book shop or I'm somewhere where there's a few books, I'll flip them and read them, and I've ended up face palming. And that's the problem. You have to stop a conversation, give them an example, pull off a page off the internet or something from a Marvel comic to show them what you're talking about. And then it's sort of like they just kind of step back and they read it and they're like, oh, that's what we're talking about. And, and a few examples I will give is the fact that we had Spider-Man, I think he was in Japan or something, but he had Asian people. He was taking them out left and right and stuff, and the story was kind of flowing. This is a Dan Slott story. And then when he looks around, and it was right up there with, it kind of made me feel like he pulled from Kill Bill, and it was like The Bride versus the Crazy 88s and stuff. But all of a sudden he just kind of stops, and he says, am I racist for knocking out these Russians, or Japanese, the Asians, Japanese? And I'm just sitting there just kind of like, to me, that's racist, where you have to look at them and you just don't see them as human beings. Yes, it's a fictional story, but these were human beings who were out trying to kill you, and you were outnumbered, and you were using self-defense. And you stop the flow of a story just to sit there and have a page that you could rip out of the book and throw it out. and it wouldn't be missed just so you can say you made something politically relevant. Oh, he's stopping and thinking about this. It's bullshit. A good writer wastes nothing in what they're in with the book. When they're writing a book or a story, nothing is supposed to be wasted. Everything is supposed to move the story along. Everything is supposed to be, character, building up to the climax of the story, or getting your theme out there and stuff, right? That's where I come from. It's not the diversity. It's not the we have a lack of diversity of ideas. I've said that before, but it's not the diversity in the politics. If you want to get politics in there, at least write a decent story. This is why your sales are slumping. And with what I've seen in the media and following these things, we've had grown men on Twitter all night, like Nick Spencer and Mark Wade, and I believe Mark Wade deleted his Twitter account, but they were going back and forth after this summit, and some people were pointing out to Nick Spencer, I think that was his name, they were pointing out to him some of the stuff that he's wrote, and he was saying, I never wrote that, you took it out of the context. And then the guy they were arguing with went and put up the pictures of the comics, the actual comic pages that he was denying that he had wrote, and it was just amazing. It was the most bizarre thing. I've seen grown men fighting on Twitter all night and then lying about what they did and did not write, and it's all printed and could be put out there, and it's getting crazy. That's one of the reasons I'm backing off social media. So yeah, it's like you really cannot get critical and talk about comics and the execution and the good stories and get with them. There was a Captain America issue I read where it had the new Falcon and Rage, and they were fighting 4 college students who were SJWs, and the dialogue that they had in there was just insulting. It was like watching Batman and Robin and seeing Arnold Schwarzenegger playing Mr. Freeze, making those really bad puns, chill out, cool, and stuff like that. Very campy, very bad. The SJW girls had one of them pulled out a grenade and said, "Here's your trigger warning," and I'm just sort of like, what the hell? It's just bad. And that's what I mean. If people were actually reading the comics and they were able to separate the politics from the execution of the story and what the writer and the artist are doing, and the stories they're telling, that's why these things are slumping. It's not because of just the diversity and the things like that. It's the shoehorning of it in. That's the big buzzword right now. You're shoehorning this stuff in, and I'm gonna have to agree with that. It's like it's lecturing and things like that. And what I want to do is give you an example of what I think these people in comics. I'll go ahead and say it. I mean, I'm a consumer talking to you. Your job is to get the money out of my pocket, even though I'm a middle-aged, white male. You're in the business of making money. Go back and read Brief Lives by Neil Gaiman in the Sandman series, and there's a character named Wanda who was a transgender woman. And what Neil Gaiman did is we got to meet the character, and we got to get the shock value at the time where we're like, oh my god, this is really a man, going back into 90s terms. And as we go along, Neil Gaiman was able to work into the story, the discussion of what makes a man, what makes a woman. Is it what you feel on the inside? Is it who you are? Who are you? How do you feel? Where does this come from? He even threw out the fact that, in order to do magic, the females needed to do the spell, and it was on a chromosomal level. They had to identify as a woman to do it. Thus, Wanda was left behind. Wanda gets killed, and Barbie, her friend, ends up going back to the small little hometown they're at, and you have the family saying that he will have a Christian burial, and he will be called a man and use his Christian name and things like that. And we get to see the bigotry and the struggle of things back then that people had not ever been exposed to, and it wasn't done in a shoehorning way. It wasn't lectured at you. It wasn't thrown at you. It wasn't just the square peg going into a round circle in the story that just blew it all up. It showed you a person, a human being with feelings, as real as a character can be on paper, and you just that's how you got to know them, and you got to get a little compassion and some understanding and get exposure to it. A long time ago. So I've stepped out of the snow globe a little bit because I refuse to believe that all these highly educated people and people have been in. Oh, and I stepped out of it because, like, I feel like I'm looking at smoke and mirrors. Okay, either we've got Stockholm syndrome going on with Axel Alonso, Dan Slott, Brian Bendis, and all these people. Something's going on. They've all snapped somehow. Insulting the audience. Just the stuff they've done that's been talked about over and over. If you're following anything on YouTube or Twitter or anything that's going on, okay, and some of the things that they're doing, and I can't help but wonder. That's when I step out of the snow globe of this collecting and look at it and remember some of Disney's history. Disney owns Marvel, and how all this seemed to really get a lot of steam going, when Disney bought them out and took over. And I have to think about how Disney did their original characters. It doesn't sound like a conspiracy theory because this has really happened, and I'm just kind of wondering if Disney is preparing themselves for the future because they think long term, big bucks, they buy franchises. But when was the last time that you saw anything Disney pushed with Mickey Mouse and Goofy and Pluto and Minnie Mouse and Donald Duck, all their core characters that build everything on, right? When was the last time you saw that? Well, it comes down to copyrights and trademarks, and I'm not the expert on copyright law, and I actually tried to look it up before to do a video on it, and it's some very intricate and delicate legal stuff. And there's been a few laws that have extended copyrights and trademarks by 5 years here and 10 years there, to where I couldn't really see exactly how long a copyright or / trademark lasts. But we'll say it's like 75 years or so many years after the death of the creator and stuff. And I feel like we're looking at smoke and mirrors. I feel like we're getting tricked. Okay, we're they're going after a younger audience that is not buying the books. At the same time, as a marketing employee, and then it's also like they're really sticking to this, and even the writers and everybody's using the buzzwords like we're trying to do something new here, and they're inflaming, they're pissing off their audience, and I'm sitting here like, this is crazy, this can't be real. And I'm kind of wondering if they have us looking over here and they're having us argue and look at non-issues, when actually this is a ploy to a lot of these characters that Marvel has had, like Captain America. They've had them since the 40s. They've had a lot of these characters since the 60s when they actually became Marvel. And these copyrights are going to, end one day. And is that why we're having all these new characters come in and the derivatives of our core characters coming in? Are they looking to the future of trying to have these new characters and they're completely destroying Captain America, made him a Hydra agent, whatever's happened to Tony Stark? I've heard they've gone back and forth with Thor. Some people are really liking what they've done with the Unworthy thing. So, there's some gems, there's some good stuff there. And then my heart goes out to the people who do look like these new characters. I've seen Miles Morales talked about, where these kids just have this look in their face that I've seen people have with Peter Parker, so they capture something there. And then, I see people cosplaying as Squirrel Girl, a character I hate because it started out as a joke, and I'm just not getting the joke, but you're also talking to the guy that hates Booster Gold, so, there you go. So, yeah, that's what I mean. That's one of those things where there's some good things that have come out of Marvel, and I hope they don't lose them, But I'm really wondering if that's what they're doing. This is really all about Disney thinking forward. When the copyrights and the trademarks and all the court cases that Disney got in there and do to hold on to them so these characters don't go out in the public domain, well, they just went so far with them, as far as they could, and then they started buying up franchises. They bought the Muppets, they bought Peanuts, they bought Star Wars, they bought Marvel. They're buying things that already make money, and they're going with them. Disney is into brands that makes money, and I just can't help but think that changing these books gets them out of paying royalties to characters. They settled with the Kirby family finally after all these years, and they can't disclose what money or what agreements were made and disclosed And they went after the Gary Friedrich. Oh, Gary Friedrich, I think, one of the co-creators of Ghost Rider. They went after, they went after him. He couldn't draw or do anything with Ghost Rider, even at conventions and stuff, because they own him. And what did they do? They came out with a derivative of Ghost Rider who drives a car instead of a flaming motorcycle. And things like that. We're getting derivatives of these characters. We're getting fresh, new, young faces and stuff that's being put out there. Meanwhile, the core characters are getting pushed to the side, even though there's a back door to bring every one of them back. So I feel like I feel like we're getting tricked. We're getting hoodooed. They've got us looking left when we should be looking right over here. And I can't help it that they have the Marvel movies planned to 2027. What are they going to do after that? Just abandon Marvel? So yeah, I feel like that's what's going on. I feel like we're getting tricked. I feel like maybe a few people have gone so far down the rabbit hole they've drunk the Kool-Aid and really have lost their minds a little bit that work at Marvel. And I know this is the first time I've ever seen it. Until there's a regime change at Marvel, people are not going to be coming back. And I've lived through Jim Shooter, Tom DeFalco, Bob Harris, Joe Quesada. And these jobs don't last forever, guys. Money is what talks, and that's eventually what's going to happen. So when the snow globe is getting shook up here, just kind of settle around, because it always settles down. And in the meantime, keep a foot in the real world and realize, there's more out there than this stuff that is not as big as it is. I remember being young and thinking things were just so life and death and taking things serious. So, yeah, it's kind of good to get a little bit older and chill out. Okay, I just wanted to put that out there, man. Maybe you got something out of it later.